As a teenager, growing up in the late 90s, one of my favorite hobbies was renting videos over the weekends. There was Blockbusters, of course, but I got most of my tapes from a local mom and pop store that was only a few blocks away from my house. They tended to have more of the classic horror movies that I was after. There were slasher films like Halloween and Friday the 13th, but my favorites were always the ancient silent ones. Movies like Nosferatu and the Lon Chaney version of The Phantom of the Opera were at the top of my list. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was a tape that I rented so many times that I'm surprised my parents didn't just save their money and buy me the damn thing. Repeated viewings of these films resulted in completely bizarre dreams. I won't call them nightmares because they weren't particularly scary, but they had the same atmosphere to what was shown in the films. Some of these dreams were where my brain were remembering specific scenes, while others were completely original. These dreams influenced me to watch more and more of these films, just to see what kind of surreal images my brain could conjure up next. Unfortunately, I never documented what I observed. Over time, these dreams will have blurred together and I can only remember bits and pieces of them. Only one occasion is crystal clear on my mind. It's probably the clearest recollection of any nightmare that I ever had. Notice that I refer to it as a nightmare this time. It didn't scare me at the time, but it does now. It started with the ending of The Cabinet of Dr. Carligari. For those unfamiliar with the story, let me give you a brief rundown. It's about a twisted magician named Carligari that uses a sleep-nutter named Cecile to kill everyone he chooses. At the end, spoiler alert, it's revealed that the character telling the story is insane and that Carligari represents the director of a sanitarium. This is where my brain, or whatever force behind the nightmare, picked up the story. With silent films, they were usually accompanied by orchestral scores or piano compositions. The only music that came with these dreams were random mixes and bells and piano notes without any rhyme or reason to their structure. This is the same kind of music that played over the nightmare, but had a much more harsh and demanding tone than any dream that I had before. The scene began with Dr. Carligari descending a flight of stairs. These stairs were completely rigid and jagged, much like the stairs seen in the film. He walked down them for what felt like minutes before arriving at a floor with mangled windows stretching over it, despite having no visible light source. He approached a triangular table. Lying on the table was the seemingly deceased body of Cecile, and then cut to an extreme close-up on Cecile's face, forcing you to stare into his lifeless eyes. The sound of TV set became louder and louder, but were completely drowned out by the stat music. That's when my alarm for school rang as usual. I remember being only slightly creeped out by it, especially by how vivid it felt. Nevertheless, I prepared for school and eventually forgot about it. It wasn't until that weekend that it began creeping its way back into my subconscious. That weekend, my cousin, Jacob, spent the night at our house. He was my age, and since my aunt was okay with it, my mom encouraged me to rent a movie from the video store for us to watch. Upon arriving at the store, I wasn't sure if he was into the same kind of movies as me, as he picked out A Nightmare on Elm Street. Since our parents had made plans for him to spend the night the next weekend as well, I thought it wouldn't hurt to at least try to introduce him to the silent films. He seemed open to the idea, so I strolled over to the shelf where the usual copy of The Cabinet of Dr. Carligari was available. What caught me off guard was a completely different version. Most silent films, including Carligari, are in the public domain, meaning that any company can put out their own copy without facing legal trouble. This copy didn't look too out of the ordinary when compared to the other silent films, so I just assumed that the owners of the store would place the old copy with a newer one. However, that theory felt incorrect, as the new tape had a much more ragged sleeve. My dad was getting impatient, so I hurried to check out the tape. The employee at the counter, who I've seen a million times before, did a quick double take while picking up the movie. It was obvious that he too expected to see the other copy being checked out. Nevertheless, he placed the tape into a case and then into a plastic bag with A Nightmare on Elm Street. I noticed that the label on the tape itself just said Carligari. Again, this didn't seem too out of the ordinary. I remember the store also had a copy of Godzilla vs. Megalon that just said Godzilla on the label. The distribution companies were being just lazy as usual, right? Watching A Nightmare on Elm Street with Jacob was a lot of fun. I got my mom to make popcorn that tastes exactly like the kind in the theater. It was probably just loaded with butter. And mixed sodas into crazy concoctions. Jacob seemed to have no problem with scary movies. In fact, he seemed more desensitized to them than me, considering he was more used to the modern ones. He appeared to be enthusiastic to check out what the Cabinet of Dr. Carligari was all about. I warned him that it was a lot different than what he was used to, but he didn't seem to have a problem with that. The tape played out just fine. Jacob was engaged with the film, which surprised me immensely. I almost forgot that it was a different copy until the film came to an end. When the twist was revealed and the film went to black, I stood to rewind the tape. "Wait, it's not done," Jacob said before I could hit the rewind button on the VCR. What happened on the screen sent shivers down my spine. It was a scene of Carligari descending a flight of stairs. "What the hell?" I whispered before looking over at Jacob. His face was blank, as if he were in a trance. Once the shot cut to the close-up of Cheshire, Jacob began screaming at the top of his lungs. He flung himself back into the couch and violently swung his arms through the air like a madman. Our parents rushed in, and my aunt relaxed him as I shut off the VCR. They began yelling at me as if I was the one responsible for upsetting him. After my aunt pulled him out of the room, I rewound the tape to the ending scene and showed them that there was nothing that would have caused his outburst. I hesitated telling them that I witnessed this same exact scene in my dream only nights before. I doubt they would have believed me. Needless to say, my aunt and my cousin didn't return for any more weekend sleepovers. When my dad and I returned the tapes to the video store, I noticed that the usual copy of Carligari was sitting where it always had, as if nothing had changed. My dad asked the owner why they had brought in the second copy, but he swore that he had no idea as to why it would have been resigned into the store. He picked up the tape and took it into a back room. I thought that was the last time I will ever have to think about it. But it wasn't. The mystery of that tape nagged me for a long time. Years after the incident, I emailed Jacob and asked if he remembered the movie. He said that he only vaguely remembered screaming, but that was the extent of it. No luck there. At the same time, websites like eBay became popular, and my curiosity got the best of me. Despite several sources, I could never find a VHS copy of the movie that matched the one from that fateful night. Just days after I'd given up the search, I heard that the video store that I had rented it from was closing down and was selling loads of their old tapes for cheap prices. I figured that this was my only chance to reclaim that tape. But alas, it was not pleasant. The owner said that he had thrown out a lot of tapes over the years and that it was most likely lumped in with the rest of them. Part of me was glad that it ceased to exist, but something in the back of my head kept me at the store for a little while longer. I picked out some tapes to die, but That's when I saw the original Carligari tape that I had viewed relentlessly as a teenager. I eagerly brought it, and now I said to myself, to me, it's not just a relic from my past, but it's a reminder of one of the most unexplainable occurrences I have ever dealt with in my life.